So here we are. We're already into week 3, so the semester's going fast. It seems like it is to me anyway. It may seem slow to you. I don't know. So um, we're coming off the group assignment. Just wanted to remind you that group project's the only time in this course you'll do a group paper. So from everything from here on out will be individual based. So sometimes group projects can be a challenge depending on your group. And I know some of you guys experience that, but thanks for your patience and working through that. One reason we do the group assignment is to kind of get you used to some things you'll expect when you're that lead teacher in a special education classroom, because you're going to have to work with multiple people and work with a variety of personalities. So you can kind of see it gives you an idea sometimes maybe people's work ethics. So and when you encounter that and kind of know what you're dealing with. So it's good to experience that, but to reduce any stress moving forward, again, just know everything's individual based moving on. So pretty much all the projects I've got scored. I think I've got maybe one hanging out there that was a late submission. So we'll get that finished up. So I tried to make sure I had that for you and get some feedback back. So the group projects all look good. No really problems there at all. So moving into the individual reports, just a reminder, remember I've got an example posted for each one of them that you're going to encounter as we progress forward. And so the one coming up this week is going to be the informal. We'll kind of review it a little bit, but I'm going to share my screen and share some information, just some highlights of your readings quickly. For you, I'm going to concentrate really on one specific actually a couple documents I just want to share. One's a slide. Actually, I clicked the wrong one, so I'll just go ahead and do this real quick and then backtrack. So I went ahead and popped up the syllabus accidentally, but while I've got it up there, I'll just kind of shift some things around, talk a little bit about it. So as you guys are working on the informal, your report, a lot of you guys, I hope, are well on your way because it's due Sunday night. So it's going to be up on us before you know it. So I encourage you to start that last week. So just kind of look at things. You can see the categories. The first one's identifying information. That's where you're basically going to identify what informal assessments. So your goal was to try to pick out 3 informals that you could use just to kind of do some quick assessment, some screenings on your kids. So you just kind of briefly explain the type of informal assessment, the dates it was administered, maybe a brief description of what each one of the informal assessments, the skills that it will measure, kind of the purpose of the informals, kind of the purpose of administering those for this assignment, and then the reason why you selected those particular informal assessments. Again, remember, just about anything will qualify as an informal assessment. So sometimes students, when since this is our first one, they may overthink it a little bit and cause some undue stress. So it's pretty simple. Again, it's just something that you can get a quick screening on the extent of the information that the student knows to give you an idea, possibly where some weak areas are. The next thing we'll do is drop down and talk a little bit about the student background. One thing I will mention here is if you are fortunate enough and are going to be able to use the same student on all these assessment reports, this informal, normed reference, and the CBM, once you put together this particular section, you can go ahead and use this same section for background in the normed report in the CBM, okay, if it's the same student. So that will save you a little bit of work, not having to go in and recreate the wheel, reinvent, okay? This will save you some time. It's not going to be self-plagiarism or anything like that, so you don't need to worry about it. So remember, if you're using that same student, you can reuse this same background section, okay, moving forward. So
Dr. Posey, what's meant by that 10 teacher observation right after
that's an error where it shifted up. So you can just ignore that teacher observation. That's nothing. I need to pull that off there. So my apologies for the confusion. No, you're good. So you want to identify the student. Don't use a real name, use a pseudonym, okay? Or you can use initials, their age, disability, if it's already been identified, or if they haven't been identified and placed, you can put their suspected disability, kind of what you are suspecting. In the school level, I just identify what grade they just completed, since we're in the summer. Okay. Then you're going to include a little bit of background information, maybe a little bit about their background, their academic performance, maybe any test scores. If you have previous information, you kind of want to include that. Maybe a little bit about their behavioral background, if they've experienced any behavioral issues. You may include any teacher observation content. If that teacher, maybe your coworker, your colleague is giving you a little bit of information, you might put that on there. Also include a little bit of pertinent family information. So what we're looking at here is a little bit about the background. Is this student living with an aunt and uncle? Are they living with grandparents? Are they in a single parent household? Is it a blended mixed family? I mean, I've seen everything on that, from living with mom because dad's in and out of prison, or both parents have been in and out of the prison system and have been placed in foster care. So just give a little bit of background there. Doesn't have anything extensive. And then any other relevant background information that you might think is pertinent to this student, okay, to kind of to create the picture of the background. The next category, this is where we're going to talk about test results and interpretation. So basically just the information you're getting from them 3 informal assessments that you have selected. So basically you're going to want to go in and do an explicit analysis of the results with supporting data. So you're going to basically describe in narrative form some of the results you got based off of the informal assessments. If it was a exit ticket and you were wanting, a certain number of items on that exit ticket, that student was able only to complete 2 of the 5. You might just explain what the content was, what you were asking, and if they successfully provided 2 out of 5 answers correct. So it's just basically a narrative explanation, a format. The next thing is, and this is going to be something that may possibly be new for you, is we're going to look at the information, the results. And so we're going to take that and we're going to try to create a table, a chart, or a graph to create a visual representation of the results that you got. For the informal, you won't have a lot to put in here. It's going to be very basic, okay? You could show maybe the number of questions if you do a bar graph, and then a color-coded bar to show that they got, I use the example, 2 out of 5. Okay, there was 5 questions and the bar goes up to showing they got 2 correct. Okay, it could be something as simple as that. Remember, the goal here is basically that we're just trying to create and come up with ways that we can create a visual representation that will support or show the information you provided in the narrative format. Okay. As you go up, we look at a normed reference report and the CBM, those charts, tables, and graphs obviously are going to have more information because we're gaining a lot more information from the type of assessment that we're going to administer. Okay. So for this one, it's basic. Remember, I have an example posted, and I kind of showed you, I think, maybe that first night as I was kind of walking you through where things were on Blackboard. There is a sample in there, and it shows some basic charts that were used for this type of assignment. So remember, that's a resource for you guys. Okay, so out of this particular section, there's 55 points possible out of this. I always want to point this out because out of all sections, regardless of the report we're doing, this class, this section will be weighted the heaviest as far as points, because we're going in and providing narrative form of the data with the results, and then we're creating the charts, tables, and graphs. So you had to present the data and the tables, which we did. We talked about that. You can see it's worth 9, and then also explain the data that was put into that. So just provide an explanation of what you chose to visually represent, give an explanation on that. So those 2 items there are 19 points. please make sure when you're putting this report together that you go back and check this rubric, because especially on this first assignment, a lot of times students going on previous history of these classes, they'll blow right over that and totally forget to put those in there. Okay, so just make sure you put some type of table, chart, or graph. After you do that, to wrap up that section, you're basically going to identify strengths based on the data you collected. So identify what you felt like was the student's strengths. And then you will also conclude that section with identifying what you felt like were weaknesses that you could see. This section right here, these two items are going to be important, especially as we go and develop a lesson plan after you finish this report. You know, I talked about that's something that'll go in that portfolio at the end, because really you're going to want to key in on those weaknesses when you're doing that little mock IEP. You're going to want to talk about, you know, hey, we definitely noticed some strengths, and they are then in that mock IEP, but we also identified several weaknesses that we want to focus on, and that's what our goals are going to be developed on when we do that mock IEP. Okay, so really kind of keep that in the back of your mind. The next section is going to be the recommendation and conclusion. So basically you're going to highlight some instructional planning recommendations based on strengths and weaknesses that you identified in that previous section. Okay, so those recommendations could be anything from different instructional methods that you may use, or if you are suggesting and recommending that the content should be modified down to a particular grade level. So Denise, let's say you're working with a 4th grade student, and it's obvious that on the 3 formal assessments, their scores basically weren't good. I mean, that was obvious to you. Okay, I'm using you hypothetically as an example. So if that does happen, it could be that content's way over their ability level, need to drop it back. So that could be something that you recommend, that we drop it back to a 3rd grade level and maybe do some intervention and then rescreen them and see how they scored. And if they score low again, we might need to drop it back even lower. Okay, so that could be a recommendation. So I just want to point that out. Could be also changing the material. Okay, it kind of goes back to changing grade level, or do we need to reduce it down a number of questions? Maybe do we need to reduce it down and only provide half of the lesson? We may have to go in there and split it and present it in 2 segments instead of 1 setting. Okay, so it could be shortening length of instruction time. I mean, there's a multitude of things you could do on that. And you're basically just going to support that recommendation, Denise, by the data. Again, everything's going back, and it's all based on the data you're collecting from that particular assessment, okay, to work with them. Okay, so the data basically is the guiding point. It's going to drive instruction. It's going to drive recommendations on interventions, anything we're going to do. So as far as content and creating that recommendation conclusion section will end the body of the report. Basically, that's your last section. The last thing we're going to look at here is just an organization of mechanics. You don't have a section to create for that. That's just basically things I'm looking at. So I'm looking for, were you able to present your ideas in a relevant, coherent, cohesive manner? So is it a flowing manner in which you presented that? Basically looking for correct use of APA, making sure you format your paper and everything looks good there. And then also looking for spelling, grammar, sentence structure. And then also, here's something, making sure that you include a copy of that parent permission form. Okay. Sometimes this is another thing that students forget to include. I mean, that's 5 points easy right there. All you got to do is include it. If it's the same student, you would include that same form each time. If you haven't listed all the different assessments you think you might want to give, you simply update it once you choose the norm and just write it in, then rescan it and attach it to your norm reference. Okay, so it's basically a working document. Denise, you have a question?
Yeah, I looked for the copy of the parent permission form. I think somewhere in either the syllabus or the notes, somewhere it said week 16, but we don't have a week 16.
No, it's in Blackboard it's a standalone document, and I will go back and show you on Blackboard where it's at. It's basically, you go to the SPED 805 resources tab.
Okay.
And it's going to be, I believe it's the very first document. Once you click on that tab, it's going to have all those template forms on there. And I believe it's the very first one. It says parent permission form, and then it goes down to all the other different template forms.
Okay,
Before we get off here, I can definitely go back to Blackboard and walk you right to it.
sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions before I switch off of this? So basically,
So,
the
do we, oh,
I'm sorry,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. No, you're
Do
fine.
we
Go
need
ahead.
a permission form for each assessment?
So if you're using the same student, you can explain to the parent, hey, I've got to do multiple assessments. So for the first one, you may already know, is it Rhonda that asked me the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
So Rhonda, on that, for this first one, the informal, you can go ahead and list them on there. You can write them in or type them in, however you want to do it. And just explain to the mom, hey, I'm going to have some more. I just haven't selected them, but I've got to do a norm reference and some CBM. Once you know what they are, you can write them in and then just relay verbally the information. Hey, mom, I just want to let you know for that norm reference, the second one, I've selected this assessment.
Mhm.
Just you can let her know, but I would have her go ahead and sign off if you're going to use that same student on all three. And then you can go in there and update it each week and then rescan it and attach it to that new report. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So let's say you got Johnny Joe and you've already written down the informals that you used on there, whatever they are. You got 3 on there, and mom signs it. And then just say, hey, in the upcoming weeks, I've got to give some additional ones. I just don't know what they are yet. When we get to that point, the norm reference, and you say, hey, Dr. Posey, I want to give or work with my school psych, and we're going to use the WJ4. You could write it down in there, WJ4 cognitive. You could let Johnny Joe's mom know, hey, this is what the school psych and I are working on the next assessment. She's already signed it. And then you would scan it, rescan it, and attach it to your norm reference report when you hand it in. And so it's going to show what you did previously, and then that WJ4 was added. And use that same document.
Okay, so for this assignment, we just have to do one informal assessment?
No, you were to pick out 3 different informals. Okay, so you will have given 3 informals. This is the one where you'll have 3, and they're short. I mean, literally, you can give them in 1 to 2 minutes. It's just a quick snapshot. So let's say the 3. I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm doing an exit ticket. I'm doing a time sampling, and I'm doing a short 5-sentence written response, a paragraph response, just a reflection.
Mm-hmm.
That could be the ones I chose. You just write them down on one line. Time sampling, exit ticket, and whatever your next one was. So I chose, those are my 3. And remember, informals can be teacher made. They don't have to be created by a textbook company or something out there. I mean, you literally can create them based on things that you might have been covering in class.
Right. Okay.
I'm going to share a document with you, and that's going to show you the ABCs, and I'll apologize to you in advance. I didn't realize after I told you the other night that was on there, that link was messed up. And on top of that, I forgot to send it to you. So your instructor messed up here, but I got that fixed. I will click over and pull it up and show you. And it gives you an example of informals that matches the alphabet. Like A, it might be a certain one that starts with A. And I'll show you the documents updated. I'm going to share it with you this evening on screen to kind of show you in case you're struggling and need another one or 2 to utilize. Okay.
When we do these informal tests,
Yeah.
are they all on the same subject?
They can be in different areas if you want. They can all be in the same subject, or you can do a math, a reading, and a spelling, or you can do one that's a behavioral and one that's math and one that's reading or spelling. I mean, they can be a variety. They don't all have to be in the same content area. They don't have to, or you can. You can do them all in reading. One could be a reading fluency, one could be a reading comprehension, and then you could do one with spelling. So it's totally up to you.
So can we use test or informal assessments that we use during the school year, or do
You
we need
can. You can,
Okay,
if you've got some, you've already got them collected, or if you want to see a different variety, I mean, there may be something on the site I'm getting ready to show you, the resource, you may go, oh, I like that one, I'm gonna try that and see. So,
I just don't
Um,
know how much access I have to students right now.
okay. Well,
I had a
I-
question.
okay, hang
Sorry.
on just a second, Lee. I want to go back and circle back around on your questions. So the one thing is moving forward, it's going to be extremely important. And I went over this at the beginning of the course, but I just want to say this as a reminder. When we get to the normed reference and the CBM, that's why it was important to try to locate a student that you would have to work with, because those definitely you will need access. Now, if you remember, I talked about, due to the nature of the summer semester, we always give a lot of flexibility to where if your student isn't going to be accessible in person right there with you, you could do a lot of this with Zoom meetings or Google Meets, however you want to do it, if you had to administer them and have them complete the assessments or the activities. So, I mean, that's an option as well. So I just want to make sure, especially on the norm reference and the CRT or the CBMs, we'll have to make sure some type of student to communicate with on that. Okay. So one
That's
double
what
check.
I did. I just set up with the parent over Zoom.
Yeah.
Once the SY is over, we just set up, we're going to meet 3-4 times, however many times we need.
Yeah. And on the CBM, the goal is really, even though we're in a shortened semester, and this is something I covered at the beginning of the semester, to kind of think about how some of these kind of overlap, and it can kind of somewhat feel overwhelming to you because you're like, oh my gosh, I ain't even got this report done. I already need to start on these next screenings. That will really ring true for the CBMs, because really we would like for you to try to get, realistically, if possible, 6 data points, if possible. So that's why you might have to start that thing 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out, maybe meet with them 2 Zoom sessions a week to have them do that. Now, each session might only last you 5 minutes, because the CBMs really are a glorified advanced version of an informal. It's just a little bit more extensive, but it could take you 5 to 6 minutes each setting, each time you do it. Alex, how long did it take you on Zoom each time on the informals? Was it short?
I haven't done it yet, but
Okay.
I have the kid in person right now,
Oh, okay.
but I
Oh,
don't
moving on
expect
after
it-
summer school. I got you.
Yeah, but I don't expect it to
Your
last more
CBM
than 10
shouldn't.
minutes. Yeah,
The CBM shouldn't.
no.
On that. It's just having to do it more often, because again, we're wanting to try to get 6 data points if possible. That's kind of the goal. Okay. Okay, Leah, I'm gonna go back to you. Did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just had a question. Am I allowed to do it on my son?
You are, for this summer, and I had that question come up. I think the student emailed me, and just due to, again, the flexibility, we're a lot more flexible doing this class in the summer, because we know that you may not have access to as many resources compared to if you were doing the class in the fall or spring. And so
Okay.
we allowed that to occur in the summer. A little bit, like I said, a lot more flexible in the summer.
Okay. I also had one more question. He doesn't have a specific label. He's just DD.
They don't have
Is
to
that
have.
okay?
They don't have to be a student that's already been identified and categorized. It could be someone that may be suspected, or if they're younger, and depending on your district and their guidelines, they may utilize DD up to a certain age. Other districts may not.
Yeah,
And
my
so-
district does it till 10, I think.
Right. So you can go on there. They don't have to have already been tested and identified and qualified. It could be some that you just maybe suspect could have and want to see. We're wanting to try some of these assessments on them.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
you're welcome. And the thing is, like on the background, going back up there, you might say, instead of has identified and categorized as LD and all that, you may just say has a suspected disability and currently is categorized as developmentally delayed until more formalized testing in the district can be completed. So you might just put a statement in there like that. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Any other questions before I switch over to the next thing? I just want to make sure everyone was clear on that, see if you had any questions. Again, remember, guys, informal, it is pretty much what it says. It's very informal. It can be teacher made. Just don't overthink it and then stress yourself out on it. The one that's very formalized and has very strict procedures, guidelines on it is the next one we're going to work on, which is a norm reference. That's a couple weeks on down the road, but there's not a lot of wiggle room when it comes to that. I mean, especially depending on what one that you select and have the resource in your district to work with, especially if it requires a qualified examiner. Okay, so you might just kind of keep that in mind as we start moving forward on that. And I'll talk more about norm reference next week. I don't want to really get into too much of that tonight and confuse you when we're not done with this one. So definitely something to think about. Any other questions before I switch off of this? Everyone good with the rubric? It's in the syllabus. Okay, let me next share with you. Bear with me just a minute because I had it up and ready. I say I did. No, just a second. I wanted to share what the ABC, here we go. Get back over to my Zoom. And I have updated this link and it is in, it says week 3. So week 3, I believe, has 2 particular tabs when you get into the learning modules. And if I remember right, it is on the second tab for week 3, or the second tab you'll click on. And you'll go down and it'll say like the ABCs, informal assessments A to Z. So basically this document will provide examples of informal assessments using the letters of the alphabet to identify them. So anticipatory guides, and it gives a brief explanation of it. And this is a website basically, and it gives you a little example of what it looks like. Okay. Then the next one is Bump in the Road. It's an informal assessment. It gives a little description on that. Basically, they're having to write down some responses on it. C is what they call the crumpled question toss. It gives a brief explanation about it and what it intends to, information that it will collect. And so this document, this website, which you can see it's got several advertisements, but you will see it will have different examples of informal assessments based on letters of the alphabet with a little bit of an explanation, a narrative about how to administer it and kind of what it looks like. Entrance exit cards, exit tickets, you've heard me refer to that. So students, it gives an example. Students write down a response to a teacher generated question on a slip of paper. Okay, teacher will collect those as they leave the room, or maybe as they're coming in the next day to see what they remember. Teacher reviews those to see what kind of responses are on there, and it determines, Alex, if you need to go back and maybe reteach an area. Okay, just something real quick, very informal. F, Four Corners activity. Okay, talks about posting questions, concepts, vocabulary words. So you could do that for math, reading, whatever it is. So a lot of these are you're able to use across the curriculum. It's not just really specifically specified or any one thing. Graphic organizers is another one. So again, these links are updated and it's in there. If you want to go back and look at this, it'll go all the way down through Z. Idea spinners. Journal entries. For older kids, you might want to have them do a journal and look at their journals after class that day, at the end of the day, and just thumb through it for the day. And they have to put a short response about things that they remembered about the lesson or the activities that you covered that day. Key concepts, informal assessment dealing with letters. This is a written response. So students had to write a letter to their mom or dad, but not as an assessment. As the office earlier finish activity. And so it's perfect way to you go and look and see how their writing skills are, or the use of vocabulary. again, note taking. There's another activity called onion circle. So it's a little short activity. So again, that was the resource I was referring to when I mentioned that last week, until I discovered after class the link was messed up and I forgot to send it to you. So that is in Blackboard and it's updated for you. So any questions on that? Everyone good? I'm gonna switch over to my next.
Where at in Blackboard did you say that was at?
Hang on just a second. I'll switch over there and I'll show you. Bear with me just a minute. Let me get, well, I'll take you to the Blackboard because I think I need to show another one of you where the, bear with me. I'm gonna get to my content here before I switch over. Seems like my internet's draggy or slow this evening. I'll switch back in there and give me just a second. I'll pull it up and then I'll share the screen with you. Da-da-da. Okay. Can everyone see my screen now? I'm in my Blackboard shell. Does it pop up for you? Okay. So to find that, the A through Z, or the informal assessment A to Z, go to your learning modules, click on it. I'm going to go down to, now we are starting module 2 because we're in week 3. So I'm going to click on module 2. And you will see there are 2 lines for week 3. I'm kind of putting my cursor over the first one. It says assessments and special education. Well, I'm going to jump down to the second where it says informal assessment. And I'm going to go down and you're going to see right here where it says the ABCs of informal assessment. I got my cursor on it. So I'm going to click on it. And so basically I took that exact web page link that I just showed you. Then there it is. It's got you right back to that website. Okay. Does that help you, Nikki? Okay. So I'm going to go back quickly. I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to my SPED 805 resources because I think one of you, maybe if I remember, I had a question early on about the permission form. So actually I misinformed you. The peer collaboration rubric was the first one. Because everyone still see my screen? Yep. So when you get to SPED 805 resources, this page is going to have a lot of the templates that we're going to use through the semester. So I misinformed you. The first one actually is the peer assessment collaboration rubric that you guys used, is to rate your teammates. The next one was the team contract. The third template on there is the parent permission form. And it's a Word document. You can go in there and literally just pop it up and type your information in, or you can print it off and handwrite it. Either way, but that's where you'll find it. So I couldn't remember if that was Leah or who it was that asked me earlier on. I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget to show you that. So 805 resources, and it'll be the third item. Everyone good there? Yep. Okay. Last thing I want to do, let me skip over here. I'm going to pop up. There was some information on a PowerPoint. This particular one, I wish, and I need to go in and break it down because really the first half of this slide deck will show CBMs. So I literally skipped over that because it's kind of confusing and I really need to go in and divide it up. So basically what I did is I jumped down to the informal, where it says other informal methods of assessment. And so this is kind of going to correlate back to that A to Z page that I showed you, but it just gives you some different ideas. Error analysis, task analysis, that maybe having them complete a task in class. Can they complete the test 3 out of 5 times successfully, whether it's just basic skills? So maybe that might be something maybe that's for younger students when they're learning how to do specific things and you want to see if they can actually perform it. Error analysis, that could be when you're having them go in and do some writing, a short paragraph response, and then you take that up and you're going and identifying how many errors they had within, a particular paragraph that had 50 words in it. You want to see how many mistakes they made, okay? CBA, criterion related assessment, that would be more a little bit for older kids. So checklist could be a checklist, short questionnaire. You can do the questionnaire with exit tickets, one question on there to see what kind of response. Student work samples, permanent products, could be a portfolio, could be an interview where you just basically you're asking them questions, a quick interview with them. You have a couple questions. I want to see what Johnny knows. I want to see what Susie knows. So those are just some examples. Here are reading. Some of you guys might be focused in reading. So I mentioned a while ago, they could all three informal assessments could be in reading. You could do one in decoding, another in fluency, another in comprehension. Just kind of gives you a little description of what those entail. If you look at comprehension, you're looking to see if they can derive meaning from the written language. If it's they read a short passage and then provide the answers. They answer questions about a story, or they might paraphrase. You might have them retell. You might have them answer vocabulary questions, or do what's called the mass test, closed test. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Anyone know what a closed test is? Anybody heard of that before? So basically, a closed test is you provide a paragraph, and you might go in there, depending on the age of the student, you might go in and mark out every third word or every fourth word. And you're going to ask that student to read that paragraph and predict what vocabulary word needs to be placed in where you whited out the original word, to see if they can use inferencing skills based on the remaining content that's there for them to read. What vocabulary word do I need to utilize to put in that blank to make this comprehensible, so it comprehends, makes sense. So a lot of times we do closed test once they get up around that third, fourth, fifth grade. Okay, so it's kind of that mid upper elementary. But a lot of times if you go through, I was an elementary ed major in my undergrad, and so I remember our methods of teaching reading, those courses I had to take, we had to do a lot of closed tests and develop them. So it's interesting to see how those kids can go through there and determine what words to plug in. But that's what a closed test is basically. Fluency, you can do informal reading inventories, error analysis. So you can go in there and have them read words. This is actually an example of a subtest when we do the WJ4, which is a normed reference. And so they have to read specific sentences. As an examiner, I'm tracking that and identifying all the mispronounced or misidentified words as they read those sentences. And as they progress, the difficulty level of the vocabulary it increases. So fluency could be the rate at which they read without making any type of mistake, whether it's verbal. So you're looking at the rate that they read orally without any mistakes, and then it gives you ideas of decoding. So that just kind of gives you some breakdowns of the reading. Looking at independent reading inventories, it kind of gives you some guidelines on that if you were to choose that for reading, if you're still kind of your background's in reading. I mentioned on their spelling. These are some examples. CBA basically is just a little simple old-fashioned spelling test, and for an informal you might want to only give them 5 words or 10 versus 20 compared to the weekly spelling test. You might have them say the word, use it in a sentence. Analyze errors. You might be looking for what are their phonetic abilities, what is their visualization skills or linguistic performance. So that kind of gives you some ideas in spelling. Writing, if you are working with some older students and you focus on writing skills, this is something you might want to look at, looking at some short written work samples. And so in order to do that, you might want to create a little rubric to kind of guide your scoring. But you might want to analyze the writing for spelling, punctuation, creative ability. Also, informal assessment technique, you might want to, compile a story starter So you provide them a template where it starts off the story. It gives them like the first sentence, 2 sentences, and then their goal is to go in and complete that story based on the information they've collected in the first 2 sentences. So those are interesting. Sometimes kids get really creative on that and they enjoy doing it. It's kind of a challenge. So after 1 minute, you might give them time to read the first few sentences, give them a minute to think about it, and then tell the child to begin writing and give them like 3 minutes to see what they can add to that story. So you might be shocked at the results you get on that. Also, you can use this same thing if this same document to go in and look at their fluency and correct the number of words that have been written and spelled correctly. So you could use this one type of test for multiple things. You could score their writing ability. You could also go in there and identify correct words compared to incorrect. So you could do 2 in 1 on that as well. And you literally do it in 3 minutes, basically at the end of their writing. Okay. So it gives you a suggested 3-minute time frame on that. Here we talk about performance assessment versus authentic. So basically performance, a student is going to have to perform. They're actually going to have to do something besides maybe just pencil paper. Like I gave you an example a while ago. If it's a younger student, you might want them to perform a task. If they're learning how to, perform specific skills in a classroom where they're having to be up moving and be mobile and go and successfully complete those. So those are some examples of performance, and it can also be academic as well, where they have to go in and provide explanation to the answers that they give, just to see if they can elaborate a little bit on it other than just producing answers. Can they go and expand on maybe why they chose that? Authentic assessment is when the students apply knowledge that they have gained and gathered through time, and they are consistent with generalizing that information into a real world setting. This is actually, again, that particular area is something that goes along. It's a subtest when we give the WJ4, which is that norm reference. There is a subtest in which they have to go in there and use generalization skills and apply it into real world settings. There's 2 subtests on that. So it's interesting looking at it from the formalized setting compared to the informal, and how these kind of correlate, and that same type of skill is measured when we give the formalized assessments as well. So there's a lot of correlation there, just done in a different manner. Criteria for evaluating. Okay, so it just gives you some ideas on what you might want to, how you might want to evaluate it. It gives you some ideas on, okay, what am I going to look for on this particular assessment? Okay, so maybe checking comprehension, again, going back and assessing their prior knowledge, and can they apply that knowledge to performing a specific task for you? It could be looking at higher order thinking processes. So it could be other things other than just generating an answer or spelling a word correctly. There's some additional things you could look at to evaluate performance tasks. Portfolio assessment, it's often used. It could be an ongoing informal. And so this may be a working document that you might want to implement into your classroom. And it gives you kind of a working history from the beginning of the year all the way through. So like I said, it's a working document that can be filled with informal assessments. Great tool to use, especially at the end of the year when you want to go back and compare where they were at the beginning, and you've got a year-long's worth of information and data that's collected into that portfolio. So kind of interesting when you can go and at the end of the year, flip back to the beginning and kind of go through it and see how they progressed and how that's transformed over time. So again, that's something you might want to consider as an ongoing working document in the future, because it's continuous over time, and you can put multiple different informal assessments in there using a variety of methods in which you're collecting the information. It doesn't have to be just one specific thing or focused on one specific subject area. You can include a variety of formal assessments in it, just compile it into the portfolio. So definitely a handy tool to use, especially when it comes up time for testing. You've got months, weeks worth of information right there in that portfolio, and you can simply just lay it out and show the parent, everything that you've collected. Here's examples of what could go in a portfolio: samples of their writing, story maps, reading logs. You may require your students to keep weekly reading logs. Vocabulary journals could be things, art projects, group work, papers that they've done, projects, daily journals, writing ideas. So the list is endless. You can use just about anything to go within that portfolio. Here's things that we get into, and this is it's the last slide in this deck, but it's kind of shifting gears and kind of as we start looking at normed reference, which will be the next one. So I'm just going to kind of go over this really quick. These are some challenges related to normed reference assessments. And so that's a lot of times why districts really may be focusing on 1 to 2 or even 3 that they particularly like to use, and for multiple reasons, to avoid some of these problems. And they feel like it's a very valid instrument. But some of the things that need to be considered when we look at normed reference is certain instruments may have identified problems with them, and that happens. So this is something that, like examiners, we try to keep up with information that's put out to us, so we can see that there's been consistent problems with maybe a particular testing instrument. And a lot of times we may avoid that and not use it just because it's known to have some validity and reliability issues. Also, it could be problems with test administration and interpretation. Okay. Problems on how it's administered. You may get someone in there that gets all wonky when it comes up time to start administering that, and they kind of want to go rogue and start doing their own thing. That affects the outcome. And also interpretation. So I'm gonna give you an example of this because I had encountered it this week, getting ready to have some conversations about it. So we got an examiner in the district, ended up giving a assessment to a student that's kindergarten, knowing the home background, lack of exposure, all that, went ahead, followed through. Kindergartners a lot of times don't have a skill set base, so just naturally testing the student that age bracket, that age, kindergarten, you're not going to get a good, reliable result. And then the outcome is that they score extremely low. Well, that's to be expected, right? Because they don't have the skill set. But yet we're going to take that score, use it, and do a placement that may impact them the rest of life. Okay, so these are things to think about. That's more on the administration of the test and interpreting the results. But it's like I said the last couple of weeks, when we're doing these assessments, the goal is to go and look at the whole picture, the background, lack of exposure to school. Maybe parents weren't diligent about sending the child to school. We have to take that into consideration. Is it truly a skills gap, or is it a lack of exposure? So yeah, we have to look at attendance. I mean, it is a huge factor on that. And so looking at the whole picture, and I mentioned, I can't remember if it's the first week or second week, also not relying on one specific test to determine. Okay, that's why it's important to have all this information gathered up and look at everything before making that final decision. Okay, also something else that needs to be thought about is when we're selecting this is the information sometimes in these normed or formalized tests may not represent material that's actually taught in the curriculum. Okay, those are things that going through the process, even before you get to testing, that really needs to be looked at and determined. Curriculum bias is another thing. Lack of alternative forms, that affects test. Alternative form kind of goes back to the language barrier we talked about. You guys, some of you had written about that because your interviewee that you selected maybe perhaps brought that up, that those can be issues about, if they're non-English speaking, having interpreters, also making sure the cultural differences among different ethnicities. Those all need to be taken into consideration. Okay. Another problem could be not sensitive to small gains in academic growth. And then also, I just talked about this, cultural and linguistic bias on that. Okay. That's a big deal, especially non-English speaking coming in. Yeah, they're obviously probably going to score low because it's a language barrier. They don't fluently speak English, right? They're still speaking their native language. So those are things that we consider, and I know that's kind of jumping ahead, kind of planning the stage for norm reference, but those are just something to think about. So I went over that. Another thing I would encourage you, and I know we're just kind of wrapping up informal, you guys are putting your papers together. I would encourage you to go ahead and start thinking ahead. Just in the back of your minds, like, okay, what direction am I going to go when I want to consider norm reference testing? Just kind of get the wheels spinning on that. We will talk more in detail about that on Wednesday night when we meet next week, but just kind of have that in the back of your mind. Also, something you need to remember is, do you have a colleague in your district, depending on the size of your district, that might be a school psych or school psychometrist, someone that's qualified that you can collaborate with as we're working through that norm reference assignment. If you don't, and you work in a smaller district where maybe they contract those individuals and they come in on an as needed basis, there are a few other tests that are considered norm reference a lot of times that schools use, and you may not really truly realize that it's a norm test. I'll give you some examples. We'll see if your district uses it. Some common examples. I don't know how many of your schools utilize STAR reading and math. Anybody know what I'm talking about? It's part of the Renaissance package. Okay, those STAR reading and math is considered a norm test. Schools that use it, we've used it, districts I worked in, it's a computerized, but it's norm because it's comparing the scores of your children in your district and norming those against students the same age and comparing their progress. We use that as a benchmark we have for our readers, especially on the reading one. And we would give it like 4 times a year. We would get it at the beginning and then at the end of each quarter is what we did. And it's considered norm reference. A lot of times it's administered in a computer lab. The whole class goes in and does it. They do it individually. Okay.
In
So
the Shawnee Mission School District, we use Acadians. Is that the same thing? Because we do Acadians reading and math.
it's going to be very similar. Remember, one easy way to determine if it's a norm reference is on the score reports. If it provides standard scores, percentile ranks, and all that, that right there is the easiest way to determine whether it's a norm reference test. That's the dead giveaway right there. Okay, so you might take a look
at a grade school level. Like, I don't think that STAR test thing you're talking about. I think we
all the way up to high school.
It goes up to high school.
Yeah, we've used it all the way up through high school to assess our kids, especially if they are in special ed. But yeah, I mean, when I was an elementary middle school principal, I did that dual row the way our school was set up. And so I had all my kids, we did the early STAR, and we started them down there in the kindergarten level because they were learning basic skills and we could kind of do a screening on them using the early STAR. And then we converted over to full-blown STAR as they were coming into second. And we utilized that STAR all the way through middle school in 8th grade. And then we pull out students that are still struggling readers through the high school because we were doing some interventions with them and we were bringing those selected students in and continue to screen them. Okay, so the STAR reading and math is one you can use. Another common, it's getting to be popular in a lot of districts, is MAP testing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that or have heard of it. If your district uses that, that is a norm reference test. A lot of times MAP tests are administered at the beginning of the year, oftentimes sometime between the first day of school and mid-September. Then a lot of times the second administration of MAP test is given either right before the first semester ends as kids go on Christmas break, or they may do it coming off of Christmas break sometime in that first 2 weeks of the second semester. And then they go down to do the third one. Oftentimes it'll be sometime after spring break, typically in the month of April. Often depends on when your state tests are scheduled, because they try to avoid those areas. So depending on Kansas and if you're in other states, I don't know what for sure your testing schedule state test looks like, but we normally typically try to avoid that. So they could even do it even early May after state testing is over with and go in there and do another screening. A lot of schools do that, and they'll do it starting with kids when they're in first grade, and they'll do those 3 assessments, and they'll start that in first grade and do it all the way through, all the way up until they get into high school, because you can do it for benchmarking. It also gives you a lot of detailed data, and it also gives them some information on determining kind of predictor on how they might do on the ACT or SAT as well. So something to think about. So start looking at it. We can talk more in detail next week and get some specifics nailed down, but just something to kind of have in the back of your mind. I know you want to get this ready, the informal, but I just kind of wanted to throw that out there and see if I'll put this out there as an option so you don't stress yourself out over it. So we did this going back several summers ago when we started doing 805 in the summer. And we knew it might be a challenge having access to someone that was qualified on that. So basically what I did, and the whole video is on there, and then I can share the comprehensive report. So basically what I did is I brought a student in and I personally tested them in the summer. Is that for a reeval? And so I got permission from the parent. She worked for me that time in the district I was in, and I recorded all of it. So the recording, it's in the course shell, and it just says SPED 805 testing lab. And basically the recording that I provided was me administering the WJ4 cognitive. So I have the cognitive, and then you have the achievement. The cognitive has a lot of interaction between me as the examiner and the student. The achievement, when I go to give it, I didn't record that and upload it because there's very little interaction, because so many of them are timed, and literally I'm giving the student a set of directions, and then they got like 2 minutes or 5, and then I move on to the next test. So I didn't find that to be a valuable thing to put on there, but the interaction on the cognitive it's about I did certain segments. I think it's about a probably 30-minute deal. I didn't do the whole, but I gave you the video to show you enough to give you an idea how that process works. If you choose to use that, which is an option for you, you can, to meet the requirements for the normed reference. So literally you can email me, say, hey, Dr. Posey, I need to utilize the alternate option that you have for the normed reference report. I'm going to watch your video, and then would you please send me a copy of the comprehensive report, which I will. I think it's about 15, 18 pages long. If enough of you end up doing that, and this is what I've done in the past, if enough of you choose that alternate option and I send that out, what I've done is schedule an additional about a 30 to 45 minute Zoom to where literally I will have all of you join in that want to, and I will go through and basically go through that comprehensive report and show you as an examiner how we go through there and present the results and how we interpret those results to determine whether that child qualifies for special services. Okay, it gives a lot of detailed information in there. So I've done that in other semesters. If there's 1 or 2, I can meet with 1 or 2 of you. It's not that big of a deal if we don't have a lot, but it gives you a whole different look, because a lot of times you go in, and even as a SPED teacher, you don't know how that process works. The only time you see is the end result when the examiner's coming in and there's a room of about 10 people sitting at the table. to get the results. And that examiner starts going through that and throwing out all this information, and it can be mind blowing. So it gives you the opportunity to see how the test is administered. And then it also gives you an idea to see how we go through, present it, and how we interpret that using the statistical information that's provided. So just gives you kind of a different viewpoint. So think about that. That is an option for you if you have trouble having a
We
resource.
had a couple of questions in the comments in the chats, like iReady or FastBridge.
I will need to double check that. I need to look at those real quick and see. I think they will, but to be 100% correct on that, I want to look at it quickly. And then see, I'm gonna write it down. Jenna, you had it on FastBridge, and then Denise was on iReady. When we get off here, I can look at that real quick. It won't take me long. I just want to look at a couple things and I can answer it for you and shoot you an email.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for pointing that out to me. I was wanting.
Could you let me know as well? Because I know FastBridge is one that I do use at the high school level.
Sure.
And I have data to back that stuff up.
Yeah. Now,
I have FastBridge also.
okay. So that brings up an interesting point. Okay. I'm going to look at that. Then I can get with you. Is if indeed it is for sure, and I look at it, and you've already have data from students you worked with, you can pull that and use that if it's current. I don't want you going back on 3 or 4 years and pulling it, but if it's from this school year we wrapped up, I'm certainly open to that, and that's permissible to do. Just don't go back 2, 3, 4 years on me and pull it. I want some current data on that. Okay.
Yeah,
So-
and the thing with iReady, and I don't know anything about FastBridge, but the iReady is the program that we use for our, readacts and things like that. So it wouldn't be everything's set up as a time frame for the diagnostic and the growth monitoring and all that. So I wouldn't be able to administer that this summer.
Right. So on this particular one, again, in the summer, now we're not as flexible if it's in the spring or fall semester, because obviously encourage them to try to work with someone in their district because they have access to them, right? But in the summer, again, we are a lot more flexible. I am in it because I know schools shut down and we're limited on that. Okay. Now the norm, a lot of them, like on these particular one, a lot of them are perhaps computerized assessments. I'm assuming on FastBridge and iReady, correct? It's going to be similar to map testing and all that.
Yeah.
Okay. So it literally, you probably wouldn't have a responsibility as far as sitting down and administering that, other than bringing your kiddos into the lab if it's a lab setting or however you do it, right? The other ones like the WJ4 that are diagnostic assessments that are going to be used to determine placement. And also when we're acquiring an IQ score and all that on their in-depth, you're going to have some additional qualifications on that. So I'm going to say this too. When we get to that normed reference, because there was confusion, I had to go back 3 or 4 different times. I had to put it in writing. By no means am I going to be encouraging you to go and get your hands on those types of assessment and asking you to administer them that require those qualifications, graduate qualifications, and additional training. Okay. Always try to make that clear. I'm not asking you to, and I don't expect you to, because that's a no-no. You're not supposed to do it. On these others, yeah, there are different ones out there you can at your level and not have the additional qualifications. Okay. So I just always like to say that because it had a lot of confusion on it last semester. And some of them took it that I was encouraging them to go back to their district and borrow the test kit and go do it, and never said that. So anyway, again, we will clarify next week, talk a little bit more about it. Let's see who else. I had Alex. You say you use FastBridge?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And who else?
Stacy.
Laura.
Tara.
Yeah. So what I may do is just send out a group email to each section. That way I covers everyone. For those that ask questions about FastBridge and iReady, those are acceptable after I checked them, and you may proceed forward on that. So it'll be something that simple. It won't be an announcement in the announcement section. I'll go in there and key it in and send it as a direct email to the class. Okay, that's what I'll do. All righty.
So our district uses MAP, and
Map
so,
testing. Yeah,
and so I can, and we just took it in the end of April or 1st of May.
got your results on that.
Yeah, so I can use
You
some of,
can pull that. You definitely most certainly can. Yeah. It
Thank
is a warm test. Yes, ma'am. Very accurate, very reliable. Becoming,
We use one. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say it's becoming more widely used. More and more states are implementing it. I know a lot here in Oklahoma, a lot of a lot of schools use it. In Oklahoma, it's become really popular down here for benchmark testing. And especially schools implementing it and starting kids with it in first grade and utilizing it as they progress through the district, through the system. It follows them all the way up to high school. So some of the schools down here have been doing it long enough. They've got volumes of data on each one of their kids. So Stacy,
I really like it. I think it's good.
yeah, it's got some good, really good reporting too. It provides a lot of data for you to sift through. So yeah, it's a good one. Stacy, I'm sorry I cut you off.
It's fine. If we use our previous information from that, how do we need to get a consent form from the
Yeah,
parent?
so
for
if
that
you're gonna
too?
pull
Okay.
it on us, if it's not that, I'm assuming maybe it's gonna be the student that you selected to work with, but you're gonna go pull that data. Is that right, or is it a different student?
Different student.
Yeah, if it's a different student, you need to reach out to that parent, make sure they give you permission to pull that. I know you could easily pull it at school, but just for professionalism and all that, you need to get permission, make sure that parent's aware. You might also make them aware, hey, I'm not going to use your child's real name. I'm going to create a pseudonym for them, or initials only. They're not going to know. No one will know. I'll be the only one seeing it. But just so that parent knows you're not going to use a real name, and have them do a permission form. The ones of you, if you're going to use your regular student and you want to go and pull that MAP test or that FastBridge, if it qualifies, or iReady, just make sure you let the parent know, hey, I'm going to pull that test, so you can add it on the permission form if they've already signed it. Just make them aware that you're going to access that through the school.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other
So-
questions?
Well, I don't have an identified student that I can do the assessment with. So can I do it with just a regular student?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a student that already has a category. It could be just a student that you might suspect has some issues.
What if
It doesn't have to be a student that maybe even suspected. For this
Okay.
summer semester, I just want to make sure you have a student to work so you can kind of give these assessments. Again,
Okay.
this was a fall or spring, it'd be a lot more stringent on that and say, hey, you need to kind of identify someone that maybe you suspect, a student that you have, that you're working with, but summertime,
Right.
make this thing work.
Okay.
Flexible. Okay.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we go? Again, if you do, please know you can email and kind of how I check those. I try to stay up on those as quick and as well as I can. I've been known to miss some, and I try not to. I try to make sure I get back to you either in the morning or that evening and try to stay on top of it. Also on grading. If you guys have any questions between now and as you are nearing the assignment due date and time on Sunday, please send me a question. If you're really having some struggles and we need to, let me know and we'll pop on Zoom real quick. Sometimes it's just as easy for us to do that, and it prevents any misunderstandings versus trying to do it email, especially if you have multiple questions. It's just about as easy to hop on and do a little quick 5-minute Zoom meeting. Okay. But let me know.
Dr. Posey, can I stay on for just a minute and ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am. you sure can, and I'm gonna go ahead and stop the record before we get to that point, okay? All right, guys, please let me know if you have any questions between now and Sunday, and then next week we'll kind of try to make sure the norm reference is pinned down and you're heading the right direction, and it'll be a 2-week gap before that's due from when the informals due to where the norms do, okay?